Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first installment of IOTA Insights. IOTA Insights is a series that the foundation is putting together in order to bring some more flavor and a better understanding to a lot of the different initiatives and different strategies that we've been working on over the past couple months, especially as IOTA becomes an international organization and a true standard in the blockchain and distributed ledger technology stack. We think it's really important that we're really communicating a lot of the different programs that we're working on, not only so that you're aware of them, but there's even a possibility that you might want to engage in and participate with us. So we're really excited to launch the first episode in hopefully a long series. The format goes, right, we're going to have 4 different insights today, covered by 4 different people in the foundation. So I'm going to be covering digital infrastructure. We're going to have Mathew Yarger talking about smart cities. We're going to have Richard Soley talking about standardization. And we're going to have Dominik Schiener talking about the future and probably some exciting updates there. So from my end, I'm going to really start with digital infrastructure. And for those of you that are probably wondering why this has anything to do with blockchain technology, I think that's why this conversation is kind of an interesting one. I don't know if you've ever been to blockchain events or in forums, and you'll sometimes hear investors say that they are focusing on the infrastructure of the blockchain stack. And it's actually not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about true infrastructure assets, like physical assets in your city, in your country, in your environment. It's an enormous opportunity, and it's something that IOTA is starting to look at very seriously as we expand not just geographically, but across the different verticals that we've been focusing on. Right. So there was a report from PricewaterhouseCoopers that stated that $1.7 trillion has been invested in infrastructure assets since 2010. Right. That's an incredibly large number. And it's only starting to grow it's only continuing to grow as private capital is coming in and looking to engage in this asset class, because they see it as a very low risk and relatively high return for the risk profile that they're looking to engage in. So what do I mean when I say infrastructure, right? I'm talking about roads, water systems, energy grids. These are all physical infrastructure that has been built up either over the past couple decades, or maybe they're being retrofitted, but new capital is looking to be deployed so they can build up this infrastructure. Now, there's a subclass of infrastructure called digital, and you can kind of look at this in a couple different ways, right? There's trying to connect physical assets together, right? So how are these, as everything becomes increasingly more digital, how does the water system talk to maybe a component of a smart city? Or how does the energy grid communicate with all of the houses in a neighborhood? As we become more digital, I think we need to start asking, what systems are we going to use to make these assets more digital? And that's really where digital infrastructure comes in, right? And the need there's going to be data centers, fiber connections, and reliable connectivity is only going to need to increase as these assets come online, if you will, and these cities become smarter. So you can kind of look at it as transforming physical infrastructure by adding sensors, by deploying IoT hardware, so that these infrastructure assets can communicate with one another, maybe send data to a centralized location. And this is why I think infrastructure is such an interesting use case for IOTA, right? Because a lot of the things that we're trying to solve, right? Security, safety, interoperability between hardware and humans, software, physical devices. These are some things that we're all trying to solve right now using the protocol. And being able to apply this to an area that is looking for a solution, I think is really exciting. So there's a lot of different use cases. And I think really the biggest one has to do with the safety and security of these systems. It's one thing to have a for-profit kind of centralized entity controlling these systems. Maybe it's closed source software. It's one thing if it's a web app on your computer, but it's quite another if it's a critical piece of infrastructure that could help water get from one part of the city to the next. So I think that IOTA is really a great use case for that, and can really support a lot of the projects that we've been seeing. So we've got that, and then we've also got security, right? Or building off of that. We don't create these single points of failure. So if someone, hacks into one, component of a infrastructure project, and if it's a centralized system, you could hypothetically get into the whole city and wreak havoc. Whereas with a decentralized system like IOTA, you have these decentralized nodes, as we all know, and it would be increasingly difficult to do that. So there are all these corollaries between kind of what IOTA is looking to provide and the problems that infrastructure investors and infrastructure developers are facing as they try and digitize a lot of these systems. So I think the question becomes, how are we thinking of engaging in this space? Right? There's a couple different ways. We found that infrastructure investors are constantly looking for kind of the next big thing, for a technology that will really help their portfolio grow and sustain itself. So, we've started having early conversations with a couple actors in this space to see if they'd like to partner with us. So that's very exciting. And we've seen not only an appetite, but a real understanding of where IOTA fits into the technology stack of a physical infrastructure ecosystem, if you will. The other one too is infrastructure developers, right? Similarly, there are these developers that are going and building these roads, building toll booths, building energy grids that are looking for solutions, whether they're in developed countries or developing nations. So we're looking to partner with them as well to see how can we use IOTA to create a secure, safe, and interoperable system across the world. And that's been really well received as well. And then, something that Mathew Yarger is going to speak to, which I'm really excited about, is potentially even funding some of these public-private and smart city initiatives that we've been actively focusing on, right? Because there's so much capital. Like I said, there's 1.7 trillion that's been invested in infrastructure assets since 2010. There's so much capital just waiting on the sidelines to invest in smart city projects, to invest in digital infrastructure projects. There's actually not enough projects, at least in the States, I'd have to imagine around the world, to actually handle all the capital that wants to be deployed. So, partnering with these projects to maybe even not invest, but deploy capital to IOTA projects could be a great way to scale up quicker, to engage a whole new vertical, right? The infrastructure community, and then build these allies in the space that are looking to just deploy billions and billions and billions of dollars. So that's another really cool way that we can engage with this community. The other one I'd say too, and this is a kind of interesting way that we can incorporate the token into a lot of the work that we're doing, is thinking about, all the work and research that we've gone into, like data marketplaces, and how we can de-silo this data and actually make it usable for people, not just individuals, but corporations and governments. How can we support data being sent back and forth between these different participants? And how do they do it in a safe, transparent way where they can exchange value for it? So we think that maybe even data as a new revenue stream could be really exciting for infrastructure investors. And this is probably for some of them that are a little more forward thinking, but they really like the idea that they can have a kind of asymmetric revenue stream that's different from the very regulated types of revenue that they can receive from a infrastructure investment. So it's cool, right? It's possible that we could create an entirely new revenue model for infrastructure investors. It's also possible that using the IOTA token, we could fund and actually peg revenue to a project in a developing country that might not be able to receive funding because there might not be any clear revenue that could come from developing a well or developing a road maybe in some remote part of the world. So we're really excited about that. We think that the token can really support that too. And that would be a really good incentive for, again, these large infrastructure investors to not only use the protocol, but to maybe even hold the token and participate in our ecosystem. So we're really, really excited about that. And we're continuing to explore that with people in different organizations. So before I close, I'm going to say one more thing. I've been talking about this quite often, and I'm sure people are going to be frustrated when I bring it up. But one of the biggest use cases for IOTA, I think, in all of these systems, it really comes back to what the incentives are of these systems, right? Like, who is making us do what and why? And one of the reasons that I got into technology in the first place is I was fascinated with how different tech systems would make people do certain things depending on how they were designed, how they looked, how they felt. And it was fascinating. I ended up, working in that domain for the first couple of years of my career. So this idea of incentives has always been fascinating to me. And I came across this book recently called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's by this author, Shoshana Zuboff. And she talks about this idea that incentives of these applications that are being built are really going to run our lives in ways that we can't imagine. If you ever heard of the saying, if you're not paying, you're the product, right? She actually says that's a misconception, that often there are these big social media companies that will give us something for free, but then they're packaging us up into a product and then selling us as a product to advertisers or other kind of data merchants. She says it's actually worse than that. It's not that we're the product, it's that we're actually the raw material that gets generated or that's being generated to create these products. Now, why is that distinction important? It's important because the personalization of products moved from let's take data from people so we can make better products about them to how do we create products that churn out better types of data so that we can make more money off them. So it's really how do we do things that make people act in certain ways that are more valuable to us, right? Now, I know I'm kind of rambling here, but when we look at social media, or we look at web apps, it might be one thing. And we might have one feeling or another, but it's quite another when we start thinking about physical spaces. And this is where we get back to digital infrastructure. Who do we want controlling the communication pipelines, going through our cities, going through our towns, going through our houses? Do we want them to be for-profit companies? Do we want them to be an open source distributed ledger like IOTA? We think that the latter obviously makes a lot more sense. We think that it actually opens up a lot more opportunities for innovation and entrepreneurship. Right? If everyone has control of their own data and ownership of it, you can actually build applications and services that cater to that data. You can use these data marketplaces in a clearer way. And then the incentives of how we participate in these cities doesn't become muddled, right? Like if a for-profit company works with the city to create a smart program, who knows what they're optimizing for, right? Are they optimizing for the health of the citizen or the performance of the performance of the citizen throughout the day, or to make more money, right, as the city or as the company? And we're already seeing use cases, or already seeing cases where this is starting to happen. And I think the alarm bells are starting to go off. So, we're talking to these infrastructure investors and these infrastructure companies, and they're starting to see and really understand that that's a value proposition that they need to make very clear, to their citizens and their partners as they're engaging and starting to build out these businesses. So kind of to close, digital infrastructure is really exciting. I think that it brings together a lot of the different areas that we're focusing on, right? On smart cities, on supply chain, on IoT. And it's just another subdomain that we can attack and, build up this really strong partner network. So, if you are involved in this space or engaged and you want to reach out to us, feel free. I've sent out a note in our Discord. I've already had a couple people reach out saying that they want to participate in some way. So it's really exciting. I think it's a really great way to broaden out IOTA's use case. And it really makes us, it shows how unique we are as a project, right? Like there's not many projects that can do what IOTA can do in the IoT space, in the smart city space, but this is just another example of where our technology is being built from the ground up to actually be used. So very excited about that. And with that, I've been rambling for about 15 minutes. I will move on to Mathew Yarger, who'll be taking on the next insight. We're going to be focusing on smart cities. I'll let him introduce himself, and I'll let him share what he's been up to.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? So I'm Mathew Yarger. I am transitioning into my new role as the head of smart cities. And I think this is going to be a really fruitful session for us here. So I want to start out by framing what the definition of a smart city is in the IOTA context. There's a lot of different examples of what a smart city is. It's a term that's been around for quite a while, and we've been working to bring it to fruition over the last few decades in the technology industry as a whole. From the IOTA perspective, it's about enabling regulators to make decisions that impact the citizens in a way that they need to be impacted and that is beneficial to the citizens. From a market perspective, there's different verticals that come to fruition in a smart city. So we've got many of these, of course, through mobility, energy, e-health. We're working in the digital identity spectrum now. We've been doing a lot of research into that over the last year to figure out how to create identity solutions on the IOTA framework for citizens and to create some of these citizen ID mechanisms. And we've started to talk to a lot of cities and establish our presence in a lot of different cities. So what we've seen and what I've seen personally talking to a lot of these regulators, I talked to different directors of different departments, mayors, international, federal, and local and state regulators in multiple contexts. But a lot of times they're looking for those organizations that they can trust. And I think we've situated ourselves really well, and they've responded really well to us because we're a nonprofit and we're open source, and we've made the initiative to be completely transparent. And as you've seen us grow over the last few years, hopefully it's become more and more evident that we're really trying to be more and more transparent by having more open discussions on our Discord with our developers and our researchers, taking the blueprints that we have and pushing them out and saying these are the projects that we've worked on with private and public organizations, and this is how you can replicate those with the building blocks that we've created, and trying to make that ecosystem grow through a smart city context and a project context. So the cities have responded really well to this. It's turned out really great to where they've started to trust us, and they've started to understand that we're here to help them and benefit them, and help them make informed decisions, because we've all seen it in multiple contexts where you've got an organization or a regulatory body that pushes a law into instance, and there's outrage because it was kind of designed in a bubble and the people didn't have the input that they wanted to on it. And if the regulators would have had a stronger connection with their citizens and the residents, they could have went a different route. And we're trying to enable that. We're trying to enable these regulators to make these informed decisions to benefit their residents and their populations in the best way that they can. So it's really about making that impact on residents and making that impact from a smart city context. And with us coming through that transparency mechanism, it's really worked out really well. Some of the, for examples we can throw out here are our partnership with the City of Austin and our partnerships with the City of Taipei. We've also got multiple partnerships working throughout Europe with Trondheim and Limerick and the City Exchange Initiative. And from the strategic perspective, I think it's important to note that each city has a different definition of what a smart city is as well. For instance, in Austin, we've seen very heavy focus on mobility. Austin is growing at an exponential rate. We get 250 new residents almost every single day. It's been ranked the #1 city in the US to live in for 3 years in a row, and it's not changing anytime soon. That's where I'm centrally located, and that's where I've been putting a lot of my focus, but I also speak internationally, of course. But they want to take what we've created with the Tangle, and the ultimate vision is another book that you could possibly read called The Zero Marginal Cost Society by Jeremy Rifkin, where he talks about a collaborative commons. And it's a convergence of these 3 technologies that creates the essential backbone for what a city is. And that's telecom with communication infrastructure, energy, and mobility. Energy supplies water, it moves water, it supplies mobility. And once these 3 come together, you have a collaborative commons that reduces overhead for a city, enables data propagation throughout a city, and allows people to seamlessly work together in a frictionless environment. Austin's very keen on enabling this from a mobility perspective. Taipei has been working with us really well in identity. And one of our ecosystem companies, B Labs, has been a very strong representative of our capabilities throughout Taipei, and they've been doing great work. And we've showed them extensive gratitude because they've been so interactive with us. And I think that's something to point out from a city perspective, is that if you want to build something on IOTA and you want to be part of our ecosystem, please come to us. We'll help you. We'll advise you on how to get started. We have our ecosystem grants to help you start up your organizations and build solutions, because we can't do everything by ourselves. And we really want to foster that ecosystem in a city context and international context that allows people and organizations to grow and flourish and make a difference and make an impact. I think that covers pretty much everything I have today, though. So, Dan, if you don't have anything else to add.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. There are some really interesting questions that are coming up around smart cities, but we'll wait till the end, and I think it'll be very, very helpful there. Yeah, no, I think that's great. Thank you, Mathew. So up next we have Richard Soley. I don't think many people, I think they might have heard Richard's name, but I don't know if many people have actually heard him speak or heard kind of the incredible work he's doing for the foundation. So without further ado, I present Richard Soley, and he can talk about his background and the work he's been doing for us.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. This is Richard Soley. I'm Chairman and CEO of the Object Management Group. And just as relevant, I am the Executive Director of the largest Industrial Internet of Things organization called the Industrial Internet Consortium. But let me give you a little bit of background because I think it's relevant, and especially relevant to IOTA Foundation. Besides being a not-for-profit person who's been with the not-for-profit foundation for 30 years, for more than 40 years, I've been involved in various standards and learned a lot about how the international standards world works, and seen it change over the last few years between international standards and international open source. And I think there's a lot of confusion about what open source means in terms of making a standard and what open standard means in terms of open source. They're different things. Open source, of course, is just a way to develop software, and IOTA Foundation does a fantastic job of opening its technology so that anyone can use it at any cost. That doesn't make it a standard. You can, if you want to implement IOTA yourself, not use the open source implementation, you're going to be implementing it without a standard, and the open source can change. What would be valuable would be if there's a standard and open source. My background is 20 years of starting companies, about 5 or 6 companies in the artificial intelligence space. And since 1989, I've been with the Object Management Group, one of the largest software standards organizations in the world. You probably haven't heard of us, although you probably have heard the name OMG. But you probably have heard of some of the things that we've done over the years. The Corpus standard for middleware interoperability was the first standard we built in 1990. We're pretty well known from the mid-90s developing the UML standard, or Unified Modeling Language. But it's true that if you use an ATM, electronic automated teller machine to move cash from one bank to another bank, if you fly in European airspace and your plane goes from one air traffic control center to another, if your information moves from one American hospital to another, if you are involved in any way in NATO weapons or Australian, Japanese, or Korean weapons, you've used our standards. And in fact, every retail point of sale system in the world uses OMG standards today. For the last 5 years, we've also run something called the Industrial Internet Consortium, which builds large industrial Internet of Things solutions to try to learn how to do it. We always started with a point of view that said, look, people don't know how to build industrial IoT solutions, so let's just do it. We'll make mistakes. Some of those will work, some of those won't work, but we'll learn how to do it, and we'll capture that information, and we'll make it available through our white papers and webinars and seminars, but also through our resource hub that allows you to say something about the project that you're building and what results from the Industrial Internet Consortium might be relevant to what you're doing. One of the things that was been missing in IIC since the very beginning was a way to very cheaply supply distributed ledger technologies, DLT, between the devices that Dan's talking about, not only smart city devices, but manufacturing devices and healthcare devices, smart cities, smart buildings, and energy devices, and so forth. So about 2 years ago, I spent quite a lot of time, I have a background in computer science, looking at all the DLT solutions. Some of the best known ones, of course, are blockchain and Ethereum. And I looked at these things and I thought, oh my goodness, they haven't solved this problem. They haven't really thought about this problem. They have extremely low transaction rates. The transaction rates I was seeing were in the single digits, and we had just done a major project with Swift that does 700,000 transactions a second, making them the second largest financial transaction organization in the world. And worse, the download size was in the hundreds of gigabytes. That's not going to work in IoT devices. Some of these devices are refrigerators with complete operating systems, but some of these devices are dust in a field. I said, there's no way this is going to work, and I'd given up on DLT completely until I happened to run into, through a shared friend, Dominik Schiener, about a year and a half ago. You'll be hearing from him in a minute. And he told me about the IOTA Foundation and the IOTA technology, and pointed out that the download size could be much smaller, in the tens of megabytes, that the transaction rate could be in the millions of transactions per second, and you could actually solve some of these problems if you have a DLT that's designed to deal with machine-to-machine transactions. This got me excited enough that I've joined the supervisory board of the IOTA Foundation, and in addition to my current jobs as the chairman and CEO of the Object Management Group and the executive director of the Industrial Internet Consortium. I think it's important because it says something about the IOTA technology as opposed to other DLTs. It's ready for use. It's something that can be done now. And this is what I mean by that. If you look at the history of technology and the confusion I was talking about before between open source and open standards, when open standards started coming in with the Apache Foundation and similar organizations, people said, well, we have open source, we don't need open standards. But if you wanted to build a closed implementation that interoperated with Apache, well, good luck, because there was no standard at the time, and there still is no standard. But there's one thing that I've seen every time and time again, and that is if you have an open source that is implementing an open standard, or rather the other way around, an open standard for an open source project, you positively win. You can't possibly, every single technology that has open source and open standard at the same time has been has won, has been used, has been applied, has been actually applied in the real world. And that's what we're here to talk about. Matt talked about using IOTA in smart cities, but of course it's relevant in many other settings, in IoT settings and so forth. The only way that happens if it is adopted by various technology sectors. That requires two things. It requires one, that you have well-defined use cases, and then we've defined, that's what the IOTA Foundation is doing today. It also requires that you've made it open source, open standard, positively guaranteed. So we've taken the IOTA technology to the Object Management Group to become an international standard, as the UML is an international standard. And we're also implementing the IOTA Foundation technology, the IOTA technology as an open source implementation as well. That is, if you want to use the open source implementation, you can download it today and use it today. Nothing stops you. You can extend it. You can do interesting things. But if you want to build a closed implementation that interoperates, or in fact, if you want to build another open source implementation that interoperates with the IOTA solution, there will be a standard sometime around late next year from the Object Management Group and eventually from the International Organization for Standards, ISO, that guarantees that you will have an interoperable solution. That will make the IOTA solution a solution that's used in many different vertical markets, guaranteed to be open source, guaranteed to be standardized, and that's what a major part of what I'm doing with IOTA Foundation. The next step will be making sure that it's not only an open source from the IOTA Foundation, but open source from a well-recognized international foundation. And we have some more exciting announcements to make in that area over the next year, over the next few months. But I think the pummel in this point is extremely important. To point out that there is no solution, whether it's the web, whether it's HTML, whether it's HTTP, that's available in open source and open standard that is not adopted. And adoption is important. Adoption is what makes technologies work. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're going to do over the next couple of months. That was much faster than I thought. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you, Richard. That was incredible. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of questions for you in the follow-up, so hopefully you can stick around for them.
Yeah, I'll be here.
Very good. And next we have Dominik Schiener, who I'll let him introduce himself.
Great. So thanks, Dan, and thanks, Richard and Mathew, for making this call on and giving us some great insights. So hello, everybody. I'm Dominik Schiener. I'm one of the co-founders of IOTA and also of the IOTA Foundation. And what I will talk today about is really how do you quantify the future economy of IOTA? How do you quantify the need for IOTA and also its economic potential and impact? And so over the last few weeks, we've been working with an independent research entity that has been working with us on exactly answering these questions. And as many of you probably know, it's a very difficult question to answer. Like, how do you really quantify these economic opportunities that are offered by IOTA? And the core of this really goes back to this slide. As many of you know, technology and digital and so on and so forth is really at the core of our modern economy. It's on the top of the agenda of every government, of every big corporate, because they realize there's a need to really further innovate themselves because the future looks very different from the way that it looks today. And obviously this automation brought forth IoT. Now we have billions of devices that are connected, that have become smarter and have made those processes around us really incredibly smart, meaning that it really brought forth a lot of automation. And obviously that brought its good, which means efficiency gains, reduced costs, but it also brought some bad in terms of discussions around automation. Especially over the last few years, we've seen some heated discussions around how automation is bad for our economy and how it's actually leading to labor shortages, because obviously machines replace humans. But the argument is very different. It's actually completely the opposite. Automation is not actually replacing people. It's not actually replacing labor. Automation is a reaction to labor shortage. And we've really seen this over the last few years. The best example is in supply chain, which is truly the backbone of our modern economy, shipping goods from the initial factor to the end consumer. And there we see a serious labor shortage, for example, in trucking. We've seen some announcements recently of how some trucking companies have lost millions of dollars simply because they're not able to find any new truck drivers. And that truly shows the need for further innovation in this specific industry, simply because now this very important backbone of our modern economy is not able to find anybody to ship goods from A to B. And obviously that really shows the need for innovation. It really shows the need for technology and for automation, because we want to move forward into a future where machines really start taking over some of these responsibilities that us humans cannot do today. And this is also really one of the biggest arguments why technology like IOTA is required, because fundamentally what IOTA enables is automation. And what IOTA is all about is automation. We really want to improve these industries all around the globe and introduce new processes that help to increase efficiency, that help to reduce costs, and that help to really introduce new business models that really make sure that we as a society have a well-oiled engine that is able to take us forward towards this digital economy. And the big question is obviously, why do you need a distributed ledger for automation? We obviously have smart devices that are connected, that are sending data, that are making smart decisions. But the fundamental problem that we have is two things. First of all, we today have a very siloed economy, whereby we have different clusters that don't interoperate. And as Richard has said, that is why we truly need standards, because if you don't have a standard, you cannot enable this collaboration between different entities. And a further need is really for a distributed ledger, because what the distributed ledger really ensures is that it breaks down those silos. It makes it easy for different entities, different competitors that don't want to work together, but that facilitate this collaboration through a distributed ledger, simply because it's this single source of truth. And nobody controls it, nobody owns it, but it's really this digital trust layer of our future economy. That is the first need. The second need is obviously in terms of security. We have a really big problem with securing our devices. Every day, every week, we hear about new announcements of a big company being hacked, losing data, sensitive data of their customers, or even of factories blowing up simply because of a faulty process or a faulty open port, where hackers were able to intrude the system and break the entire process around the factory. And that is a truly devastating future that we're looking at, because we have automated our society at the lack of security. And this is what distributed ledgers like IOTA truly offer to automation, which is the single source of truth. I can trust the data that I get, I can verify it, and I can make sure that it's really truly authentic. And that is really one of the most important components of automation, because I can only automate the process if I know that the data that I get is authentic, it has not been altered with, and it really makes it possible for me to verify the entire process and value chain. And the third reason why you truly need a distributed ledger for automation is these new business models. With a technology like IOTA, we truly offer micropayments to machines. We make it possible for a machine to have a wallet. And this gives us this natural evolution from automation to real autonomy. And that is truly the next step in our digital economy, where it's not just about automating machines, but it's about equipping them with the right software and hardware so that they can truly act in an autonomous fashion. And this truly makes it possible for us to have processes running around us whereby we can ensure the system and the device integrity. And only if we can ensure that, we can really trust that the automation that is all around us really make sure that the safety is also the top priority. And this is really what we at IOTA focus on, enabling this automation. So whenever I speak at the conference, I always say that right now every distributed ledger is a beta product. It's not market ready. IOTA is not market ready. Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're all still early proof of concepts. That means that we need to have the right vision. We need to have the right people behind it, but also really the right strategy on how we can cross this chasm. A very important component here, which the IOTA Foundation is probably the only entity right now focused on, is standardization, like Richard said. But beyond that, we as a foundation really need to make sure that we offer the right services and the right products that the market needs. And that is why the IOTA Foundation is focused on two separate things. For one, we are really a research and engineering entity, meaning that we focus on the fundamental sciences of the IOTA technology. And that is obviously the most important part, simply because we need to make sure that we have a protocol that is scalable, that is secure, and that really solves the needs of the industry. And on top of that, what we are really developing is these building blocks. As a foundation, we need to make sure that our technology can be adopted easily into different industries. The beauty and also somewhat the bad thing about IOTA is that it's a cross-vertical platform. IOTA is not just for mobility, it's not just for Industry 4.0, it's not just for supply chain, it's for all of these different industries, because we truly see ourselves as a digital trust layer of our future economy. And that obviously means that we need to create and develop the necessary building blocks that make it very easy for a startup or a corporate or a government to develop with our technology. So for example, that is why we are very much focused on building blocks for specific industries. Like for example, in supply chain, we are developing a transparency layer. So you can really have an audit trail and you can simply plug that into your product. And from there on, you can really create your own for-profit product out of the open source tools that we provide. Or for example, we developed a data marketplace that makes it very easy for you to internally or externally buy and sell data. And this is really the core of the engineering focus of the IOTA Foundation. And now obviously, it's easy to copy a technology, it's very difficult to copy an ecosystem. And that is why the ecosystem work of the IOTA Foundation is super important, because that is what's truly driving the adoption of IOTA. And we've developed many proof of concepts over the last few years. But what we are focused on for this and for the coming years is to really focus on smart cities and to really focus on multi-stakeholder projects, whereby we actually set up test beds, meaning that we bring together different parties and we develop an open environment where we can really stress test our technologies and where we can also stress test the business models on top of that. And smart cities are truly one of the most interesting environments for us to operate in, simply because they give us the scale and they also give us the commitment that the government wants to innovate together with us. And the good part about the IOTA technology is that it's very business focused, industry focused, but it's also very much citizen focused. A technology like ours is really all about empowering people, giving them a technology whereby they can own their own data, they can make decisions of what happens with their money, what happens with the data, and what happens with their identity. And that is a core focus and strategy of many cities around the world, because at the end of the day, their stakeholders are the citizens. And a technology like ours really helps these big governments and cities to innovate and to provide these new services and products to their citizens. And we have some very exciting work going on in Austin, in Taipei, in Trondheim. But over the next few months and years, we'll definitely add a lot more cities, and we will actually connect these cities, because this will truly give a global innovation platform, whereby we as a foundation, we're simply the facilitator. But our network of partner companies and partner cities are able to innovate together using the IOTA technology. And that is really one of the key components that will drive our adoption for the future. And one of the most exciting announcements that we had over the last few weeks was the Trinity Wallet. So this was really one of the first products that we as a foundation released, and there is more to come, obviously. But what's beautiful about the Trinity wallet is it's really a market-ready product that makes it possible for you to own your own asset, which is the IOTA token today. But the vision of the Trinity wallet really goes much beyond just being a simple wallet. It's really your digital assistant. It should be your vault of all of your data and all of your identities. And this goes hand in hand with our work with the different smart cities around the world, because what they are very much struggling today is there's this big vendor and platform lock-in, whereby you're forced to use Uber, you're forced to use Lime, but there's no overarching platform that makes it easy and makes it very seamless for the end user to transition from one mode of transportation to the next. And there's also very difficult, it's very difficult to actually share your identity today. How many of us have lost their passports, their identity cards? It's really truly a hassle. Why cannot all of this be digital, right? Why can I not own my own data? Why cannot I not decide which data gets shared with all of these different stakeholders in the network itself? And that is really the fundamental vision of Trinity, that it really becomes this data and identity vault that enables these new business models for the future to work seamlessly. And because Trinity is open source, it's free to use, it really has the potential to be the backbone application and platform for many of these cities of the future. Now, apart from this work, the most important right now, the biggest focus of the IOTA Foundation is this next step in our evolution. Obviously, the IOTA project was started in 2015 with humble beginnings of just being the backbone of this machine economy. And over the last few years, we've been working very closely on the research side on how can we make sure that our technology is future-proof. How can we make sure that our technology truly solves these problems that we want to solve? And last month, we announced Corticide. You can go to corticide.iota.org to learn more about it. What it fundamentally is really this next evolution in our technology, and is really going to be a full upgrade of the network. The promise of Corticide is tremendous. It really promises to solve this scalability and decentralization trilemma, whereby it's scalable, it's decentralized, and it's obviously secure. What the vision of IOTA is to go beyond just these three properties, because we truly focus on IoT and machine to machine, we also need to make sure that transactions are feeless. So you can truly do micropayments. One machine pays another machine. And obviously we talk about thousands and hundreds of thousands of transactions per second that are needed for the future. And so we're really focused on how can we meet these features that we want to enable, and how can we make sure that our protocol is ready for that. And just this week, or last week, we announced the first prototype of the Schiener implementation. And so that's really the first step for us to involve the community and to involve different stakeholders in this development of the entire Corticide project. So there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes, but our big goal is to obviously launch the first AlphaNet within the next few weeks so that people can participate and truly experience what this future might look like. So there's a lot of work that we are really focused on, and how can we make sure that it's not just the IOTA Foundation that is enabling this future, but it's also different stakeholders that are involved. And so that's also why we announced a big research grant of up to $5 million to researchers and universities that want to be part in this future that we are creating. And that will truly help us in accelerating the entire development of the protocol and of the different modules that we are developing. And next to that, once we are really ready for the first test network, we will obviously also give out some grants and some bounties to the community to participate in this and to have the right incentives to participate. But there's some very interesting discussions going on internally, and how can we really make sure that we have the best of both worlds, that we serve the internet, that we serve the IoT environment, and make sure that IOTA becomes what it's out to be, which is a trust layer for our digital economy. And apart from all of the technical work, what the IOTA Foundation is really focused on as well right now is transparency. So we just recently, a few months ago, we announced the opening of the engineering department, meaning that you can see all of the development that is happening within the different projects. We're obviously also working on making research a lot more transparent, a lot more inclusive towards the community and different stakeholders, but we also focused on making the IOTA Foundation itself a lot more transparent. And the best way to achieve that is to first of all publish some of our internal work, but is also to publish our finances, where we're working on a transparency report. We are right now in the process of being audited as a foundation, which is a major step towards the validation of the IOTA Foundation. But what we as a foundation really want to get is the trust of these different players that are building on top, trust of these governments that we're speaking with. And so apart from opening up our finances and providing a transparency report, we're also working on very strict policies that all of the IOTA Foundation employees have to abide to. Conflict of interest, transparency policies, and so on and so forth, that we will then also publish to the IOTA community and to the broader ecosystem to truly understand that the IOTA is fundamentally focused on enabling this future and to really be the first distributed ledger that is scalable, that is permissionless, and that is really enterprise ready. Thank you. So Dan, I think we can move over to a Q&A.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tom. That was great. I mean, there was a lot of new stuff in there. There was a lot of stuff that's been reiterated that I think kind of putting it all together, it really does paint a really strong picture for what we're working on. So thank you for that. And thank you everyone for your presentation. So I've been gathering Q&As, gathering questions. Let me turn my video on. Hello. So I've been gathering questions. We've had some pretty good ones. Surprisingly, a very low number of trolley Q&A questions. So thank you, community, for that. So an interesting one. So this is for Richard. What's the current status regarding OMG's OMG Group and the work Julie has done regarding EU banks, etc.?
So it's a good question. Our financial domain task force, which is part of the OMG, has been actively developing standard for not only for DLTs in general, but specifically for the Tangle, the IOTA Tangle. The OMG technology standardization process for the Tangle started about 3 months ago and takes on average, we know this, we've done 1,000 standardization projects over the last 30 years. It takes on average 17 months. It could take longer, it could take shorter, but I figure by approximately the end of next year, we'll be done. So it's just beginning, and we will be happy to welcome many others to participate in the standardization of IOTA over the next 17 months.
Very cool. And is there, that's actually a good point, Richard, is there a way if someone wants to engage with a standards body or help us, is there a way to kind of collaborate with you or collaborate with the foundation?
Yeah, we've been completely transparent, as is IOTA Foundation, for many, many years. Every standard is available for anyone to use, whether they're a member or not. And we welcome participation in our standardization efforts. They can contact me directly, go to omg.org and see how our standards development process works and participate in the standards development process. If they can't find omg.org, they can go to you, and I'm sure that you'll connect with me as necessary.
Great, thank you, Richard. So another question we had, this is, I think Matt's gonna really like this one. I'm kind of throwing you a curveball here. Why is identity so hard? Why not just own a communication address, which you can prove your own cryptographically?
Yeah, that's definitely a difficult question to answer. Identity is hard because a lot of it comes down to privacy, and you don't want to, when it comes to security and privacy, it's about making it usable but still secure, and that's the really hard balance that you have to find in cybersecurity a lot of times. So I didn't mention this earlier, but for those that aren't aware of my background, I did 8 years in the U.S. Army. I was at the National Security Agency doing signals collection and cybersecurity and cyber operations planning. And then I did 2 years at the Department of Defense Cybercrime Center doing digital forensics and cryptography and research into blockchain. So I've got a pretty good background in understanding this and understanding how to build this system that is for us as citizens and residents and allows us to integrate with our solutions and our systems more seamlessly. But there's a lot of different steps that come into place with that because it hasn't really been possible in the last few decades because we haven't had the convergence that we're starting to see now. And we're starting to see this with things like AI, zero knowledge proofs, CK snarks, edge computing, and just the hardware capabilities that we have now, where each of our smartphones is as capable or more capable than the first spaceship that we got to the moon, which is incredible to think about. But now that we've got these storage capabilities and everything is transitioned out to the edge, we can start to integrate these processes and these interoperable functionalities that can actually allow you to have that form of identity and not necessarily share and say, you go to a bar or you go somewhere and you need to prove this is your background or you're meeting this minimum requirement to buy a drink or whatever, because you don't want to necessarily have to go to a bar and show your whole ID and say, this is my address, this is my age, this is my height, this is my weight. They don't need to know all that. All they need to know is, can you drink, yes or no? So we have to create that system that can verify your data without it being centralized and being vulnerable, and still give them that Boolean response of, yes, this person is eligible for this thing. And that's a whole verifiable claims, decentralized identity process that is just now getting standardized and just now having a lot of research in it. And on the standardization effort of that, that's something that we're going to be pushing with OMG to work towards the standardization of how this identity functionality can actually operate on IOTA. So keep an eye out for things in that nature to come out publicly here in the short term.
I have to say, I have to add to what Mathew said. The standards community has been developing way back to Liberty, for example, identity solutions for 20 or 30 years and never come up with a solution that got adopted. Adoption is what matters. Now we're talking about adoption of an open source, open standard solution, and most importantly, non-centralized. I think that's the most important thing. We've always had identity solutions that require a central authority, whether that's a government or whether that's a bank. The ability, as Dominik says, to talk about non-centralized identity solutions is a critical step forward and a major step forward and something we shouldn't minimize ever.
So the next question we have, I'm going to field this one to Dom. Is fixed supply of the IOTA token good for adoption? An interesting one.
Right. So that's a very interesting question, because obviously we are one of the few projects that has decided to do a fixed supply. And this question is really answered by some of the thinking that me and Dan have had over the last few weeks in terms of how to position IOTA and how to really quantify its need for the future. And so if we look at the best comparison of IOTA is the spectrum. So as many of you know, the spectrum itself is very limited. That means you need to get a license to actually use the spectrum. And it's obviously a huge economy because everybody needs to have network connectivity. And as such, it's a multi-billion-dollar business on its own. And the same can be actually applied to the IOTA token itself, because it has a very limited and scarce supply, but it has a very important function, which is to transmit value. How do you make sure that one machine can pay another machine? And that is really the fundamental value proposition of the IOTA token, that it's truly going to be the backbone of this machine economy. But in order to utilize it and in order to participate, you always need to have the token. And that is why right now we have the speculative aspect of IOTA, where investors are acquiring tokens. The same is, by the way, happening with the spectrum, where infrastructure investors are acquiring licenses for 5G. In the hopes that the price will go up and that they can sell it to telco companies. And the same is in IOTA, where it's not transcending towards real utility. And we at the IOTA Foundation, we're really focused on ensuring that there's real utility and real adoption of the token itself, because we see a real need for an open and permissionless environment whereby the token itself provides this permissionless way and feeless way of transmitting value from one machine to another machine. And that is why the work that Mathew is doing with smart cities and all of our people focused on adoption are really crucial. That we have a company utilizing the token for its business model, because the future environments are hugely complex. It's not just energy, it's not just mobility, it's all of those different environments. And only one universal token actually makes it possible for a car to sell electricity to the grid operator, or to sell data to the municipality. And that is really the need for permissionless environment like that.
I think that's great. And I'd love to just add to that as well. There's another question to ask too. Not only is the fixed supply good for adoption, but also how we disseminated the token, is that good for adoption? And I think, going back to what Dom said too about having these humble beginnings, you often forget that, IOTA only raised $500,000. And anyone who wanted the token had to invest themselves or put their own money into the crowd fund in order to own that token. Same goes for the foundation. So we think that's really important when you think about adoption of this token, of this asset that's going to be used in these future economies, right? Because then IOTA looks a little more like Bitcoin rather than a lot of these for-profit closed source competitors that are coming onto the market saying, look, like, I'm not going to name names here. I'm trying really hard not to name names. But like, there's one, the slogan is, we're the borderless economy and we're creating borderless cash, but it's a for-profit company. So you have to start wondering, when you talk about those incentives again, what's the use of a token if 30% of it's owned by a couple of venture capitalists and the foundation got 30% and 20% goes to marketing? It no longer becomes this tool to exchange value. Instead, it really just has become a way to raise funding. And again, there's nothing good or bad or wrong about that, but then you just start wondering, what's the difference than just Starbucks issuing their own token and then having people buy and sell and speculate on it? So it's a very different mode. And I think that that's one of the really, really key components of the IOTA token that I think people forget, is that we really are positioned to be more as a kind of non-sovereign backed currency or non-sovereign backed digital asset that companies and organizations and governments can use without feeling like it's owned by another government. And there's a follow-up question here if anyone wants to answer. And I want to start off though. Someone asked, it sounds like there's not a lot of use cases for the token. And I think that's so interesting to see because, one thing that Dominik and I have been communicating more and more as we've been going out the past couple of weeks is, yes, we are a protocol for IoT, but in a broader sense, we're really this interoperability layer. We're really this connective tissue between the human economy and the machine economy, right? So all of these use cases where you're going to need to exchange value between humans and devices, you're going to need something like the IOTA token and the IOTA protocol. And right now, there's nothing on the market where you can exchange value at such a low, microtransactions, right? Such low level transactions or micropayments. So to be able to send data and value, not only between device to device, but between humans and devices where these products and services really overlap, that's a multi-billion, maybe trillion-dollar marketplace. And that's something that the token is, very much primed to be used for. And that's not even counting all of the different verticals where you'd need the token for value transfer. And there was something about the settlement layer that Matt wanted to fill in on.
Yeah, so I think this is a key point to get across. And on a lot of these organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, what have you, you see them saying that these are going to replace current economies and current financial systems. I would like to say that I don't think we at IOTA have that same perspective. I think it's about enabling systems and enabling governments to respond better and enabling things to be more frictionless and trustworthy and transparent. And that's one of the biggest use cases in a token, is that it is transparent. It allows for transparency. With public institutions, you want to be able to see that you can trust your local government. You want to be able to see that they're using their funding for things that matter to you and that are going to make a difference to you. And in financial institutions, it's a similar situation where you want to be able to trust your bank. You want to be able to trust the organizations that you're having your funds with, whether it's you yourself and you are your own bank, which we do enable, or you want to offload that to someone else. So you need to have these options. But I like to say when I'm in some of my meetings that we want to enable currencies to work better. So with me, I want to be able to send money to, Dom in Berlin, and I want him to get it quickly. I don't want to have to go through a 5 to 10 day ACH process where, I send him a few $100 and he needed to buy something today, but now I can't do it because it's going to take 2 weeks to get there. But if you use something like IOTA on the back end, you have a feeless, transparent transfer mechanism. So I can send him something in US dollars. It can go through what we're calling the settlement layer, and he can get it in euros, and it happens like that. It doesn't take 5 to 10 days. It's transparent, it's trustworthy, and it's something that we can really use to enable governments to have that transparency. And they've shown a preponderance to actually like be really interested in this kind of mindset too, where they want to be trusted by the residents of their citizens, and have that image that, you know, they're there for the good of their people and respond to the good of their people better than they currently are.
And just to add to that, right? Because I recently saw the Big Hack. I'm not sure if some of you saw it, but it's a very interesting movie that really talks about how Facebook and social media has caused this digital divide. Now you can no longer trust the news, the information that you get from a source. And this has transcended from a device level, whereby somebody can hack into the machine and fake the data that it transmits, to a human level. Now you can no longer trust the data that you get from a human, because there's fake news everywhere, and it's just so easy to spread it. And it's hugely interesting on how we as a society are really able to overcome these problems, because they're really at the core of our modern economy and our modern society, which is social media is everywhere. And it's very difficult to move away from this environment today. So how do we really overcome these difficulties? And how do we make sure that we can really trust the data and trust information that we get? So obviously IOTA is fundamentally focused on the machine level. How can we make sure that we can secure the machines? How can we secure your data and your identity? But there's also much more interesting social problems that can potentially be solved with having a trust layer around us. And that is what we truly need for our future and for our future economy to actually succeed. Because other than that, we will also be focused on polarizing the good and the bad, and just creating and steering up the understandings and steering up the heat of the discussions, and probably leading to lesser adoption of technology and regulating it in a bad way. So those are some really important fundamental questions that also have to be focused on when we think about technology.
It's a good one. Yeah, well, I think we've got time for like 2 or 3 more questions. So Dom, while I have you here, there have been a couple different questions about different projects that we've announced. And I know that we've been internally trying to make an effort to do a better job of kind of keeping the community updated on past partnerships. Are there any interesting, without giving anything away that's under NDA, are there any interesting maybe updates on any of the projects that we maybe announced recently, like STM Electronics or Gyro Land Rover, or just anything?
Yeah, so obviously I'm not here to announce or pre-announce anything, because that's
Sure.
our ethos. But what we as an IOTA Foundation are very much focused on is what I said before, is to move away from proof of concepts towards very deep relationships and partnerships with corporates. So one of the biggest things that we want to achieve this year is to really have a true success story, whereby we can say, hey, IOTA was implemented for this use case in this industry, and this is how much money it's generated, this is how much money it's saved, right? So you quantify the benefits of the technology, and that is hugely important when you speak with a corporate, because if you can now show them a report that was written by one of the big fours together with us, you really inspire trust, because you really show to them, hey, like if you use our technology, this is how you benefit from it. And that is a very big focus of ours this year, that we have these success stories. And one of the recent success stories was obviously ST Microelectronics, which is a huge, the largest semiconductor company in Europe. And they have a huge client base, primarily obviously big corporates that are utilizing STM hardware for prototyping and testing, but also using the actual STM hardware for their production-ready products, like for example in cars, in base stations, and so on and so forth. And now with this partnership and this integration of IOTA into their hardware, it becomes much more easier to develop with IOTA. And this is really what we as a foundation want to enable. First of all, obviously, to really create a huge ecosystem of developers around IOTA that are innovating with it, that are really showing the potential. But second of all, that we have an easy transition from a proof of concept, from an early prototype towards a market-ready product. And that is why the STM announcement is very exciting. That really helps us as a foundation to figure out how we can help our corporates, our governments, to go from proof of concept towards market-ready product. And that's why it's very exciting. Obviously, we are very much working with Gyro Land Rover on launching or figuring out how we can launch a test bed. And we also have some very other exciting partners, like for example, E-Class, where we're working on the first demonstrator that really shows how you can share data from a machine like a washing machine or an appliance, and how we can then also sell this data. And E-Class is obviously a very huge standards body where some of the largest corporates in the world are part of the consortium. So that will really gives us these multipliers whereby we do something with one company and it can then be applied to these different sectors and different industries. And those are all very exciting projects that we're doing. And obviously there's a lot happening in Austin with Mathew, and also in Norway, in Trondheim with Wilfred and the others. And so there's some exciting stuff happening on the adoption side.
Let's see. This is a good one. So what is the best way at the moment for non-developers to help IOTA spread the word out in the world?
Yeah, so the exciting part about IOTA is really its community. We have one of the best communities in this space, hands down, not objectively speaking, because we have really a community that is focused on the fundamentals, which is how can we make sure that the value proposition and the true promise of distributed ledgers and of IOTA is being realized. And one important part is obviously developers that are building on top of IOTA and innovating with it. But another one is really just people that want to participate in a discussion, want to engage, provide their opinions. Like, for example, if we work in a smart city environment, you can provide your opinion on what you would use, what you would not use, how you would want to participate. And these are just some very simple things that you as a non-developer can do, is simply engaging in a community, participating in the discussions that are happening around how can IOTA be applied in this application, how can it not be applied. And obviously spreading the word, participating in meetups, trying to join potentially an IOTA-based startup. And being part of the community is really a huge one that really makes sure that we together achieve this goal.
Very good. Let's see, we have a couple others. I feel like it's worth mentioning just because I see it so much coming up. So a lot of people are asking about like US exchanges, and I know there's a lot of concern about kind of the US ecosystem. So we generally do not comment on exchanges, not part of the foundation. We can't do that. But we are very aware that there are a lot of people in the IOTA ecosystem in North America that feel like they might be shut off because of some of the things they're seeing happen in the market. All I can tell you is that we're actively looking into it, and we're seeing what we can do to support everyone. That's really all we can say at this point, where our hands are tied. But when it comes to the regulatory side, we're work very closely on the European side, and there was a question about in America as well. We're slowly, as we continue to grow and become more standardized, we want to make sure that we're engaging in these conversations early. But those conversations kind of go hand in hand a little bit. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that.
So let's do one more question, and I'll ask it. On the regulatory side and in IOTA, as many of you know, there's been a lot happening on regulations, especially in the United States recently. And the exciting part is that we're now getting on board a new supervisory board member that really comes from the banking and from the regulatory industry. So he's very deep and very well connected and knowledgeable on regulations in the United States. So once he's on board, he will also help us really guide towards this network and also connect us with the right participants, that we can really figure out a way and how should IOTA be regulated. Because at the core of it, we want to be regulated, right? Because you can only really make sure that the adoption of IOTA is happening when we have the standardization and when we can ensure that the adoption of the protocol with the right regulation. There's many times where it happened that the big corporate said to us like, hey, what about accounting? What about taxes? And there's no very black and white answer right now. And so regulations will be a huge step forwards in the adoption of IOTA. So this is what we're doing in the United States. We are very well connected in Asia, specifically in Taipei, also with the lawmakers, where we're making some good progress in the discussions with them. And in Europe, we have IOTA, where we are chairing the board of IOTA. There's been a lot of new interest in IOTA, meaning a lot of members joining. And we set up a couple of working groups where the IOTA Foundation is also participating and also talking with the right players on how we can answer these very difficult questions. And I think at the end of Q3, there will also be a very big conference of IOTA where the IOTA Foundation will also be represented and where we'll also give some talks. So I think that will be exciting to also hear what is happening. And just so you all know, regulation is really an important focus of the IOTA Foundation.
Very good. And with that, is there anything anyone wants to say to kind of close off, or any closing statements from the insight that you shared, or just from the questions, or just anything in general?
No, from my side, I think this is an important format for us to give some more regular updates to the community. They can also interface with us and understand what the priorities are, what we are focusing on. So it's a very good format, and I'm looking forward to also welcoming some participants in the ecosystem, like for example, Elman from B Labs would be an exciting party to also have on the podcast, but the Insights call. And so I'm very much looking forward that with this format, it will bring much more transparency towards the community.
Very good. And Richard, Matt, anything you want to say to close off?
Just to say that the IOTA Foundation is, although it's quite young, has grown up, is approaching all the major issues that really matter: open source, open standards, regulatory issues, and real, true transparency and openness to the community. And I'm happy to be part of it.
Yeah, and I'll say I think this is also a great forum. We welcome anyone, whether you're technical or non-technical, to join us in our ecosystem, join our Discord, reach out if you have questions, reach out if you have ideas, and we can help work with you to enable you to build what you want on top of IOTA and help lead us in our standardization efforts and help us scale and adopt at the rate that we think we're capable of. So thank you for being here and watching.
And with that, we'll let everyone go. Thank you to our guests today, who provided some extremely well thought through insights. And thank you everyone listening. We'll let you know when the next one comes. We have it scheduled quarterly, but maybe it's going to be so popular that we need to bump it up. We'll see how it's received. And with that, we'll let you all go. So have a good rest of your day, and we will catch you around.